Thanks for staying with us. This is Newsline. I'm Michael Chigani. With me is Audrey Yu of the Civic Party. Now, Audrey Yu, just before the break, we talked about whether our new Chief Executive, Leung Chun-ying or C.Y. Leung, wants the Legislative Council, which you remember, to be a rubber stamp. I mean, back in the old days, during the colonial times, it was pretty much a rubber stamp, and as time progressed, that changed. But C.Y. Leung, I have to admit, I've not seen somebody like him in that the way he feels his job should be done. When some of your colleagues filibustered, tried to delay a by-election bill, three radicals, radical legislators, he went to the people. C.Y. Leung went to the people and says, you people, remember this, and the September election, when the September election comes, remember what they did. Now that is a very populist approach. Isn't that good for the people, though?
Oh, I think Hong Kong people actually are pretty smart. They don't need to be told, how to vote or what to do in an election. And as I said, as a chief executive, you ought to aim to be the chief executive for all. And sometimes...
Are you saying he's not a chief executive for all?
I think it would help if, as a chief executive, you don't try to draw a line between different groups of people. And sometimes people oppose a piece of legislation for all sorts of reasons. It's not necessarily personal. And you don't, as a chief executive, you don't try to ascribe, ulterior motives to people, who may not agree with you.
That sounds like you're saying he's very much a divisive leader rather than a leader for unity.
I am quite worried in that respect, and I think, as a chief executive, you do try your very best to think in terms of policies, think in terms of what you want to achieve, rather than, well, who has a motive or who does not have a motive, who is with me, who is against me. Because
is that how he thinks?
Politics changes. I mean, it really, as I said, as a chief executive, you work based on what you want to do, and
why not give him a chance?
Well,
why not say, all right, we'll restructure your government as you want. Let's see what you can do. You've got 5 years.
Well, when you talk about government restructuring, and in particular the accountability system, LegCo went through that twice already. There was Mr. Tung in 2002, and then there was also Mr. Zhang in 2007. And every time they say more or less the same thing. For example, when they ask for political assistance, they say, oh, well, they will do more district work, they will come and liaise with political parties.
And it didn't happen.
Of course it didn't happen.
Right.
Now this is the third time.
I agree with that.
I mean, even if you cry wolf, you take people on trust twice, but what about the third time? And also the way that C.Y. Leung is proposing it for political assistance, for example, he says, well, let's give a sum of money, $100,000 a month, to every principal secretary, and then they can appoint who they want and also divide up the post.
They can get one, or they can get four or five.
And to me, that's again something that is never done before. And C.Y. Leung has a habit of doing this. For example, when he appointed Ms. Chan, who's not even a principal, who's not even a permanent resident.
This has got a communist background, this person.
And it's not so much as communist background. If you look at the basic law, it actually says the government can appoint people to public official post. And this has to be a Hong Kong permanent resident. And if it's not a Hong Kong permanent resident, it has to be professional or technical reasons. And then you begin to ask, well, why is Ms. Chan somebody's appointed who has no Hong Kong permanent residency qualification?
But she helped him with this campaign.
Yeah, but is this professional or technical expertise? I mean, that is one example of him breaking the rules. Okay?
But Audrey, to be very fair, breaking the rules. To be very fair, you mentioned Tung Chee-hwa, you mentioned Donald Tsang Yam-kin. These are the two post handover chief executives. If you went to the people and said, have we been getting good government in this past 15 years since the handover? I'm sure many will say, no, we haven't been getting good government. I'm sure you would say that too. Here comes a man, Mr. C.Y. Leung. He's going to shake things up. and he's doing things radically different from how these other two. People say, we don't want more of the same. We want somebody like CY Leung. We want him to shake up the system. We want him to bring in the people he thinks qualifies, like Mr. Chen Ran, who we just mentioned. Let him get on with it for 5 years. What's wrong with that?
Well, I think that that's precisely the point I'm trying to make. That, well, if you say there are rules here, I was talking about Basic Law Article 101 on Chinese, requirement of Chinese resident, and say, never mind, forget Article 101 of the Basic Law, and then let's look at his proposal about political assistance. As I said, normally when you increase the establishment, you have a certain procedure, and also when you create a post, you look at what is required for that post, and then you create the post, and then people come and apply. But then suddenly CY Leung says, well, let's forget all this. Let's just give people a sum of money, and then they can divide up the positions into 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, depending on whoever comes along. And I mean, I know, we talk about new way of doing
when the
things,
political assistants were being highly paid, you guys were complaining that they were overpaid. Now you're saying, I'm not going to overpay them. I'm going to give you $100,000 and you can pay $10,000 and hire 10. And now you're saying they're being underpaid.
Yeah, but Michael, it doesn't mean that you go to one extreme if you disagree with the other extreme. I mean, you have to look at what's proper, what's reasonable. And all I'm saying is that
there's no criteria on how to hire
suddenly,
these people.
You don't have a job qualification, a job position.
Right.
You suddenly depend on who comes along and let me cut and tailor the position.
He can use 10,000 to get somebody to pour him coffee.
I mean that is not how government normally does things.
Right.
I mean, if suddenly government is your personal pocket, is your personal company, fine. But legislators are not there to say, well, cater for whatever CY Leung wants. Then you don't need the legislature at all.
Whatever CY Leung wants, CY Leung gets. Are you going to stop that from happening in the Legislative Council?
No, I'm not saying that, this is a position to the extent that we are opposed to everything he does. But I am trying to explain that there are reasons why we have, reservations. And this is not necessarily the way of doing things. Once we break all these rules, then we don't have a leg to stand on.
The other part, I'm going to change the subject. I've just got a few more minutes left. Zhang Yuxing, your president in the Legislative Council, some people want a motion of no confidence in him, and I think your Civic Party is considering supporting that motion because he abruptly stopped a filibuster on the by-election bill. But he can't allow a filibuster to go on forever and ever and ever. There's got to be a time when it stops. So he stopped it. So why are you saying you have no confidence in him?
Again, let's come back to what is permissible within the rules of procedure. I mean, there are certain things he can do. As the president, he can stop people from putting forward amendments which he think is frivolous. He can stop people from repetitive...
Well, he thought the whole filibustering was frivolous.
Well, he permitted the amendments to go in. Under our rules of procedure, legislators have unlimited of times to speak. But if they are repetitive, he can stop them. If they refuse, then he can kick them out, in which case, of course, the filibustering or whatever it is stops, the debate stops. But what he cannot do is to invent a rule. What he said was paragraph 92 of the Rules of Procedure, which says, when the rules do not provide for certain things, he can as a president,
and then apply
he can decide on the practice and the procedure. But it doesn't mean he can apply guillotine. Elsewhere in other jurisdictions, when the president applies guillotine, it has to follow through a certain procedure. Very strict procedure, very strict requirements. Our committee on the rules of procedure was actually looking into this and have not reached a conclusion. And our president suddenly took upon himself single-handedly
to
give himself this power, and it's not done in other jurisdictions.
Right.
In other jurisdictions, there has to be voting, there has to be passed with a certain requisite.
Okay, I've just got a couple more minutes. I want to ask you very quickly about CY Leung and Donald Tsang. Donald Tsang, rate him. He's got a month to go. Tell him, tell us all, has he been a good chief executive?
Well, when he started in the campaign for CE, he ran against Alan Leung, and his slogan was "Get the job done."
Alan Leung is one of your party members.
And I don't think he's got the job done. And I think that the sad thing is that in the last sort of 6 months or so of his terms, there were all these negative news about him taking advantages, and then he's traveling
you give him
abroad.
an A, a B, or a C as chief executive?
Well, I don't want to rate him as such, but I mean, his popularity rating dropped from over 70% to now, I think, in the 30s.
In the 30s, yeah. Okay, I've got a minute left. We just talked about Donald Tsang. He didn't do a good job. He didn't get the job done. Do you expect C.Y. Leung in the next 5 years to get the job done?
I'm worried that, in fact, his tactics will cause even more division amongst the civil society, because his personal style, very aggressive, always sort of taking it very on a personal level, going out and criticizing, including media and different political parties and people who don't agree with him. That comeback mood can be very divisive in society.
Tell us what we can expect in the next 5 years under C.Y. Leung. Obviously, it's going to be different from Tung Chee-hwa or Donald Tsang, because it's totally different. Tell us what we can expect.
Well, I think Hong Kong people would have to be more vigilant, and we certainly would agree with changes that we think will be
Vigilant.
good for Hong Kong.
Just a few seconds. Why do you say Hong Kong people have got to be vigilant?
Well, because you don't want you don't just want the silent majority to be carried away with the extreme voices that are going to come up. And my worry always is that if the silent majority, don't speak up more often, then you have the extremes taking over.
All right, thanks. See you next week. Good evening.